Welcome, everyone. Nice to see so many people here today. Wow, great audience for our presentation. My name is Susan Steinbach, and it's Sunday, January 12th, 2020. I'll be serving as the moderator for today's Life Odyssey presentation. My husband and wife, Robin Datel and Dennis Dingemans. So now, let's turn to our presenters, Robin and Dennis. Robin will begin by speaking about the early years of her life. Then Dennis will speak about what he calls the 5 eras of his life. And then Robin will close with her adult life experiences. You will have a chance to ask questions at the end. That will be about 10 minutes before 2. And for now, please welcome Robin Datel and Dennis Dingemans.
It's really wonderful to see so many of you here to listen to the life odysseys of myself and my husband. And I want to remind you that the Odyssey is one of the great homecoming stories of Western civilization. And you'll hear me talk a little bit about how I began life as a UU as an infant, and how I have returned to being a UU later in my life. So we'll look at the slides. There's a little bit of a key to them. Those with a gray background are mine, and those with a yellow background are Dennis's. So next slide, please. So I was born on September 24th, 1954 in Stockton, California, and my parents were members of the First Unitarian Church of Stockton. This photograph is actually from my big sister's dedication. There is no such picture for me, as often happens to second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth children. And so she is standing in for me there with the extended family. My parents are in the middle, and my maternal grandmother is holding her. And there was a notice of my appearance in the bulletin of the church or the newsletter, and that's what you're seeing on the lower right-hand corner. My mom had learned about Unitarianism from Aurelia Henry Reinhardt, who was the president of Mills College, the 1 year that she was able to attend Mills. And Aurelia Henry Reinhardt was a nationally prominent Unitarian leader. And my mother, who had been raised Presbyterian, said, well, if it's good enough for her, it's going to be good enough for me. And at that point, she decided she would become a Unitarian. Next slide, please. So these are my parents on their launch of their honeymoon on the left-hand side there, and then in later years on the right. And indeed, they became Unitarians as a young married couple in Sacramento. My dad was a civil engineer and administrator for his whole career with what used to be called quaintly the Division of Highways, which became Caltrans. And my mother was a homemaker and community volunteer, and then later in life, a research librarian. Next slide, please. I had one sibling, my big sister Carrie, who you already saw in her infant form. And here we are in San Diego with my mom on the left, and in Ireland, and she's doing the buttercup test. As you know, the folk story, if you hold a buttercup up to somebody's chin and it reflects yellow on them, they like butter. Well, that includes most people, right? And then my mom is watching us in the picture there. My sister was a fabulous person, a role model, my very best friend, school social worker, art therapist, creative, loving, caring, professional, and her loss in 1994 was by far the biggest loss I have experienced in my life. She left behind a niece who was not quite 12 at the time, and you'll hear a little bit more about her later. Okay, my dad decided he would climb the Caltrans career, starting as a junior civil engineer who tested the the heat of asphalt out in the field as it was being applied by contractors. And he worked his way up to the very top as the state highway engineer for the state of California. But to do that, he had to move from district to district to district. So I lived in lots of different parts of the state of California growing up. Moving and experiencing new places clearly had an effect on me when I chose to be a professional geographer. Geography is in part about places and about how they differ from one another, how they come to be the way they are through natural and cultural processes, how they offer and constrain opportunities to different groups of people. Although I wasn't really aware that I was thinking geographically as a kid, I was, and that sort of is part of why I became a geographer. Okay, next slide. My mother and sister and I were very active in Girl Scouting, and this is the one picture I have of us looking Girl Scoutish. So there's my mom, who was a leader and a trainer and a camp counselor, my sister as a cadet Girl Scout, and myself as a junior Girl Scout. And a lot of things that I learned in Girl Scouting were very congruent with Unitarian values, I will say. Appreciating nature, building community, doing service, gaining skills, and believing, most of all, that girls can do anything. Okay, next slide. As a family, we traveled a lot. So these are some shots from various national parks. We went to a couple of World's Fairs as a family, the Seattle World's Fair and the Montreal World's Fair. We visited my grandparents' farm in South Dakota, and we made 2 quite long and wonderful trips to Europe as a family, all planned by my mother pre-internet. And we did lots of local travel as well. My dad would say he was checking out the roads whenever we got lost. And we just had a lot of fun. The coast is a favorite part, particularly the northern coast of California. But we also visited scenes of culture, cities, art museums, and so on. So my mother was really big on exploring and exposing us to our milieu. In addition, we really enjoyed reading. As I mentioned, she became a librarian later in life. My sister and she were very good seamstresses. We loved to play cards and games. My dad was an excellent bridge player. And we spent time with my mom's extended family in Northern California. Okay, slide 7. So my mom was big on, so there's my mom in the middle and me on the right, my sister on the left, was very big on having us keep journals and sketchbooks when we traveled. So that's what we're doing in the picture on the left. And that also, makes you a better observer of the world and of the details of places around you. And then on the right, and I know you probably can't read what it actually says on those signs, but those are her sketches of signs from 1968 when Gene McCarthy visited the Sacramento Municipal Airport. That's the little airport down on Freeport Boulevard. And we drove up from Stockton to see him. On that sign are several interesting messages, one which is an insult of Hubert Humphrey, and one that, in fact, endorses boycotting grapes because there was very much support from Gene McCarthy for the UFW and their efforts. And my mother was very good at avoiding lettuce and grapes. This was very, very difficult because she believed every dinner deserved a green salad. And so boycotting lettuce was a tough one for us. But in general, my family of origin was politically liberal, very interested in environmental issues, in women's issues, in civil rights issues. And so that all was quite congruent with Unitarian values. Okay, next slide. So I went to public schools most of my life. I did go to a private school my last 2 years in high school. And if anybody's curious about why that was the case, we could talk about it later. I had a number of very good teachers and some that were not so great. But I always loved school. I loved school. I was the nerdiest, most studious student in my class. in most of my classes, and across the board too. I liked math, I liked science, I liked history, I liked art. I was kind of indiscriminate in just liking to be in school. And so I went on to go to St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Many people know that is the great book school. Because you read the classics of, when I was there, mostly Western civilization. It's broadened out a bit since I was there, and I did indeed read the Odyssey. I left after 2 years. I kind of got itchy feet. I did some volunteer work for a while, and then I finished my undergraduate degree at UC Davis. And I immediately opened the catalog when contemplating a major, because at St. John's you don't have a major. Everybody gets a degree in liberal arts. And so I was flipping through the pages, and it opened to geography, and I realized I could continue to think about and be interested in the natural sciences in geography, and I could also be interested in and continue to study and think about the social sciences in geography, and even the humanities. There's a humanistic theme in geography as well. And so I took 5 geography courses my first semester at Davis. And guess what? The urban geography professor at UC Davis was Dennis Dingemans. And so you're going to hear from him in just a minute, but I'll just finish this slide. I did go on after graduating from UC Davis to get a master's and PhD from the University of Minnesota. Wonderful experience in the Twin Cities. And then I taught part-time for quite a long time, and eventually got a tenure track appointment in geography at Sacramento State. Okay, Dennis, you're up.
Hello. The first slide is a summary of the first 1/5 of my life, and that is categorized by before college. It suggests that I was already I understand. Already in the pattern that I characterized for the rest of my life, and that is I tend to do a lot of different things, and I called myself here the overscheduled joiner. And the first era I'm in southern Minnesota, and up through K-12, and I did a lot of jobs. My dad, when I was 7 years old, had me doing chores, whereby I walked 3/4 of a mile to a farmer's yard and threw down silage and fed his cows. And the description up there is of a lot of different jobs I do, and including working in my father's general store. The other slides that are going to come later, the second era is University of Chicago, where my wonderful upbringing in terms of the academic things I learned in one-room country school as well as a quality high school are mentioned. Second slide. This is my father, who was a very charismatic figure. He was born in the Netherlands. His family was a wealthy family, and then it wasn't a wealthy family. They had bought a lot of Russian government bonds, and with the revolution in Russia, the government bonds were pasted up on his bathroom door because they were worthless. The right-hand side of the slide shows what a handsome devil he was. And he ran away from home at age 14 and was one of the wanderers who were characteristic of Europe after the World War I. He's shown here on the English Channel. Number 11, actually, the next slide, shows the family of 5 kids and my mother. And my mother came from a wealthy household also, but then it wasn't very wealthy once. He tried to support a family on a 15-acre potato farm in Hollandale, Minnesota. This is me with the binoculars, and this is my younger sister, my older sister Lola, showing her attitude. And she was a tough girl. She was my best friend for much of much of growing up. And when the boys on the bus were beating up on me a little bit, she went to the back of the bus and told them, "Stop beating up on my brother." And you can see there, she's quite muscled. She and I did farm labor together. She and I picked beans, snapped asparagus, blocked beets, and weeded onions. She and I were together. She drove the car. She was just tall enough to drive the car when she was not 17, but she was about 12 years old. Let's look at the next slide. This slide has all 6 of my siblings, and a very important part of my upbringing was the fact that the siblings had very good relations to each other. We never quarreled. We loved each other and appreciated each other, and this shows us on the teeter-totters, and the girls are winning. The next slide shows the quite unusual, a terrific school with terrific teachers. Not shown is my geography teacher who had a PhD, and these guys that are shown in the upper left were in PhD programs when they were in teaching humanities, and they were 3 of the best teachers I've ever had. And shortly after I had them for 11th and 12th grade, all 3 of them got their PhDs, and all of them got college teaching jobs. So I really got lucky. My one-room country school teacher was extremely sharp. She lectured us on nuclear physics and made us aware of the geography of the atom when we were in one-room school. I was in 3rd grade when we learned the structure of the atom. The next slide. It's me with Robin, and in the middle, Sherry Register, who was a friend of mine and a companion in the shenanigans of our politics in high school. The next slide is from the era when I went to the University of Chicago, and it was a waste. I wasted a lot of time. I worked really hard before in stage 1. In stage 2, I discovered girls, and I discovered varsity sports and in gaming sports. And this is a list of the jobs I had. and the sports I played, and the intellectual complexity of what I did. On the next slide is me next to Coach Bendel, varsity soccer at the University of Chicago. That wasn't very high order soccer. We were a Division IV soccer team, and one time we played the national championship team from the University of Washington in St. Louis, and they beat us 39-0. But nevertheless, I did get a leather sweater, mostly because the other people didn't want to pick up theirs after that horrendous defeat. Now the next slide is me and my hippie period. That's my 1949 Cadillac, and those are my love beads. And I'm on my way to the Summer of Love in San Francisco. I got there. I loved it. And the other half of the slide is the very wonderful friends, particularly Darrell Sewell, who was a a graduate student in art history, but who grew up in a small town in Oklahoma, and then he chose to play the oboe. So, and I like to say that he decorated me a little bit, because he was my roommate, and he knew how to cook, he knew how to play music. He was a very sophisticated person, and he's the best friend of my whole life. And the next slide is Berkeley. And the good news is that I never got thrown out of Berkeley. I did get thrown out twice from the University of Chicago for my political activities and my three-letter sport activities with girls. But Berkeley, I never worked harder in my life than at Berkeley, and I never got luckier. I played quite a few sports, but we go to the next slide, and the man who got me a career was Jay Vance, my major professor, and he was extremely fond of me, and in the talk I'm not giving, I tell you that one of the reasons he liked me a lot was because I would come to his house and play games with his junior high school daughter. She didn't have anybody who would throw the football with her, and I would throw the football with Tiffany, and play catch when she was there, and so I got gourmet meals in a wonderful conversation in the Berkeley Hills, because I was athletic with the daughter. The J Vance connection got me a wonderful internship at the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, and that was on the recommendation of Vance. But the luckier result of being the pet graduate student of J. Vance was that when the UC Davis called to say, we need a temporary professor to teach urban geography, and that was my skill. And Jay had six other graduate students, but I got the job because I would throw the football with his daughter. And I didn't just teach urban geography on a temporary basis. I really worked to up my skills. I volunteered to teach quantitative methods. I volunteered to teach urban field geography. I volunteered to teach geography of the Soviet Union. They said, boy, this guy's really working hard. The urban geography classes were a snap, but I solved lots of teaching problems for Davis, and I got the tenure track job after a couple of years of working my butt off. The next slide, me with, I got tenure, and I did an adequate job of research, but turns out my specialty was teaching, and I got two teaching awards, one academic senate and one National Geographic Society. Well, maybe my real forte was service. I did 32 quarter years of service on major committees. I was Mr. Committee. I chaired five or six major committees, and my greatest triumph in academic Senate committee work was that I was elected to the Committee on Committees. And then I was elected chair of the Committee on Committees. Those were the two highest elected offices at UC Davis. The chancellor, Jim Meyer, was on my committee. The next slide is some of my political activity, which didn't cause me any trouble at Davis. I never got thrown out, and it shows me lecturing about the war in Iraq in 1991. And as Robin pointed out, there was a lot of people listening to my lecture out on the quad. The other half of the slide is my favorite graduate student, Rob Kent, who I tell the story. He came into my office once and said, "Dennis, do you think I could make it as a professor? Do you think I have the skills?" And I said, "Yes, you do." And then at a slightly later occasion, I asked him if I thought if he thought Robin Datel would be an appropriate person for me to marry. And he said, yes, she would. And the next slide is a poster about the double century bike race and proof that I worked my butt off for the AYSO and received national certification level. Next slide is my family, and within a 2-year period, all 6 of my family members got married, and they all married mostly happily. And the next slide is my my family, again, it's a couple of slides about my sons, and in this case, they're participating in the 4th of July, and they're showing the Liberty Bell we made for them. Not shown is the tableau of George Washington crossing Pewter Creek, what else do we have? Oh, Paul Revere's ride. We were pretty creative in playing with our kids. Next is the retirement, and I call myself the overscheduled joiner, and trust me, there's a lot of things on this list. Time is up, however, and I will just ask you to remember that there are lots of jokes here that I don't have time to deal with. But there's the next slide. I co-authored 2 books about local history. Next slide. I was on the 14 years on the 14 years on the cemetery board, and I led field trips to most of the cemeteries in Yolo County. Next. Robin put this in. I'm an avid thrift store person, and what am I? I buy things at yard sales, and this is a wonderful chest of drawers, etc. The next one is the last one. That's me, and that is I've done a lot of work for the Historical Society and the Hattie Weber Museum. I've been the director of the museum for 10 years now, and that's my de facto family. I guess there's one more, but it's me. It's my pets, including Theodore's rat and my German Shepherd and our various cats.
And there's one more.
There's one more, and this is at my son's wedding, and these are me and my siblings, and we're dancing at the wedding. We're a dynamic and loving bunch. We're both thankful for all of our families, and it's Robin's turn now.
Let me just transition by saying I love this slide of my brothers and sisters-in-law because they are so lively and enthusiastic and in the spirit of the moment. And I am forever appreciative that when I married Dennis, I got these brothers and sisters along with him. Okay, next slide. So back, just very quickly, when I was an undergraduate at UC Davis, not only did I marry my future spouse or find my future spouse, but I had an internship with the State Office of Historic Preservation. I was the first intern they ever had, and they actually asked for a geographer. And how they knew to do that, well, it had something to do with mapping, and so that's why they thought of geography. And that started me on a major subject of my academic life, which was historic preservation. And broadly, that has to do with how different societies and places choose what to save and what to commemorate in the landscape. And this is very revealing of those societies and of whose story gets told and who's in power and who isn't. And so that was a wonderful internship to have. I went on to write my master's thesis on the beginning preservation movement in Sacramento. Then I did a big international comparative study of preservation in 5 metropolitan areas for my dissertation. I had a postdoc where I studied the emergence of preservation in Charleston and New Orleans. And it also provided me an opportunity to do some volunteer work for the City of Davis, which is beyond their Historical Resources Management Commission. Okay, next. So I did have a very long time between my PhD and my tenure track job, almost 20 years. And that was possible in my discipline. It would be very difficult in some other disciplines, for example, where you need access to very expensive equipment and laboratory settings and that kind of thing. But I kept doing research, publishing, doing academic service, as well as teaching in those 20 years. And so it made it possible for me to remain competitive for a tenure track job. And I will say that the CSU system does not run away from hiring their part-timers into full-time positions, and for that they deserve kudos in my opinion. So I did get my tenure track job in 2002. I got tenure in 2006, and I very quickly stepped into the chairship of my department, and I was chair there for 6 years. I really want to foreground teaching here. You can see some of the subjects which I taught as a geographer. Now I'm semi-retired, so I'm teaching half-time instead of full-time. But I've taught a lot of future school teachers. I've taught a lot of future state employees, future neighborhood activists and people interested in community development, and also just people interested in geography and wanting a liberal arts education. I did win a teaching award from the California Geographical Society, and I have had a tremendous sense of accomplishment and enjoyment from my teaching at Sac State. Okay, next slide. After I published some articles based on my dissertation, that was the international study, I really turned myself into a local expert. So I'm really all about Northern California and Greater Sacramento in terms of my research, and it is also very community focused, and I very often have community partners for what I do. And I have published on issues related to multi-ethnicity, to gentrification, to immigration, to events that have really shaped the way the Sacramento landscape looks. And I've had tremendous opportunities to work with diverse organizations, people from Capitol Public Radio, which I very much enjoyed, through Walk Sacramento, some local high schools, and so on. And I did win an award from my college, the Community Service Award. And that makes me feel really good because the CSU system considers itself the people's university. And part of our role is indeed to be heavily engaged with the communities in which we are located. And so I really dearly love that. My most popular publication by far, I'm sure the one which has been read by more people in the world than anybody else, is this little booklet on Oak Park. Much more than any academic article that I've published. And so that also makes me feel good that I'm doing outreach and helping ordinary folks to understand the history and geography of their place. Okay, next slide. So meanwhile, I got married. We bought a house, and we had 2 children. And we have shared all of those things, Dennis and I, as well as our careers in geography, which is an extra bonus. We both have pretty good senses of humor, which we share. As Dennis mentioned, he didn't get to tell all of the jokes he intended to. And we certainly have enjoyed each other's extended families as well. And occupying our now 100-year-old California bungalow there on C Street. We are still in the house that we bought back in 1977. Okay, next slide. In addition to being an academic and a community activist, I have spent a big part of my adult life raising two sons. One of them is Theodore Robert Dingemans. He goes by Theo these days. He was born in 1986. And I spent lots of time reading with Theodore and with Franklin, playing with them, cooking with them, traveling with them. And Theodore has become a geographer like Mom and Dad. And he has chosen, however, the physical side of the discipline. So he is a physical geographer. He's a paleoecologist. That means he uses environmental evidence as well as historical evidence to reconstruct past ecologies and past climates. And his study area, the suffering, is in Italy. And so his love of cooking has also been, pun intended, fed by that being his field research site. He dearly loves to cook. And that's, he recently graduated with his advisor, wonderful Professor Scott Mensing at University of Nevada, Reno. Next. And this is our younger son, Franklin. Franklin has a degree in geography as well. He has a bachelor's degree from Berkeley in geography, although he has wandered into the field of data engineering, which pays better than most geography positions. And therefore I love this photograph on the left as prescient of this. Here he is looking seriously at the GPS units and recording data for his 5th grade science project. He's married. He married Daisy Zhao in 2016 in this very room. Reverend Beth Banks married them. We had a tremendous time at the wedding and the reception, and that's where Dennis's brothers and sisters were seen dancing on the previous slide. And both boys went to religious education in this church, and you can see that their values. I just heard them earnestly discussing who they were going to vote for in the Democratic primary, and I was delighted to sort of hear the thoughtfulness that went into that conversation. Okay, next. Finally, in terms of individuals, I want to mention my niece. So this is my daughter, my sister's daughter, who lost her mother when she was not quite 12, and she is very lucky to have the dad she has, Rob Weinzimmer, who made sure that she remained part of our family even though my sister was gone. And Leah now lives in Oakland. Even though she was raised on the East Coast, she is a social worker like her mother, but she works mostly with refugees and immigrants who have suffered severe trauma. And so here she is in an earlier age with my sons, wearing appropriate Davis garb, and with her wife, Megan, and with her grandmother, Dory. Okay, final topic is just a little bit on my UU history. So as I mentioned, I was a birthright Unitarian. I was dedicated as an infant. I went to Unitarian preschool-ish up through about 2nd grade. And then for various reasons, my parents stopped attending the fellowship in Eureka. And so I was away from the church until 1993, when my mom moved to Davis on her own. She and my dad separated, and I knew that she needed a way to get to meet people and to create a community for herself. And so we started going to the church together, and later I brought my kids and then my husband, and we all joined together in 1998, and you can see a photograph was taken to memorialize that day, and it's amazing that I found that photograph. But there it is on the right. And you can see Reverend Beth with my mom. She was being honored for her role in founding what has become the quilting ministry of the church, which Julie Saylor now runs with so much success. In the middle is a photograph that you can just, if you squint, you can make out the bench in the middle of that photo, which is right out here on the church grounds and honors my sister. And then the photographs on the left and right are a part of my life as an activist through the church with my dear co-chair of social justice for several years, Stephen Harvey on the right, and with some other UUs there on the left at one of the events around the Stephen Clark shooting. Next slide. And then here you can see in the middle picture, well, first of all, you can see the symbol of Transylvanian Unitarianism, which is the dove and serpent. And you can see us working on the meeting house in Dartz, Transylvania. I believe Walt Swain, who is sitting in the back row in this room, is there in that photograph. And then on some of these same people are in the photograph on the right, which is one of my field trips, which I offer through the auction and sort of combine my urban geography expertise with some of my interests. In this case, we looked at spiritual and religious locations in Sacramento on that field trip, and we're having lunch. And then finally, all those Post-its, that should make your heart go pitter-pat as a way of getting group input, in this case for Beloved Conversations, the training that we had on how to talk about race in a respectful and meaningful way. Okay, so the last thing I want to do, and you can put up the last slide now, is just read to you what the church has meant to me. I am intensely grateful for how the church provided support and opportunity for my mother. I am also grateful for the church's helping me weather the death of my sister, the deaths of my parents, and illnesses and other challenges faced by family members. The church has provided me with amazing friends. It gives me community, music, beauty, love, and time for contemplation every single week. It has helped me live my values, providing me with dedicated and inspired social justice comrades. And helped me get arrested, by the way. It helps me integrate the diverse realms of my life. Now, if it can only help me speak better French, exercise with more dedication, and learn to use tools more competently, I'll be in heaven. So thank you very much for coming. It's been a lot of fun. If you haven't done this yet, think seriously about doing so. Get started early. That's my advice. Write down some initial notes because you'll think of things, as you go along that you didn't think in the first hour or two that you work on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robin and Dennis. That was a wonderful visual representation of many, many rich years together and sharing the same professional field. That's just astonishing, isn't it? Let's take questions from the audience. I'll be the runner to take your question, and they're both mic'd right now and can respond to you. So who has a question?
I've always been very interested in both Dennis and Robin's field because in a certain way, as I've mentioned to Robin, I share certain academic, organizational, and cultural malaise. That is, we're not in the central supporting fields that, for example, my field is formerly called organizational psychology, and more traditional experimental psychologists, theoretical psychologists don't quite accept it. For example, it doesn't exist here at UC Davis because it's too applied, and yet what stimulates my thinking in the field, and I'm sure it's true for both of you, is it brings together a lot of applications from different areas such as sociology and political science and history and so forth. And so I'd like to hear your response to that.
So geography sometimes calls itself the mother of the sciences. And it does appear very early in Greek thinking. So there is some reason to make this claim. And you all know some of the early Greek successes in doing things like measuring the circumference of the earth and figuring out something about mapping distances and that kind of cartographic expression. But geography is an integrative discipline. It is very clearly crossing the boundaries between the natural sciences and the social sciences. If your focus is places, right, they are sculpted, they are shaped, they are modified both by their location and natural processes which form them, as well as by all kinds of human systems and human behaviors. So it does, in a sense, fall between the cracks. And at Sacramento State, at least, the choice had to be made when they broke up a great big college of arts and sciences into several smaller colleges where to go. And they chose to go to the College of Natural Sciences and Mathematics. That means the sort of physical side of geography, hydrology, geomorphology, climatology, all of those things were given, sort of a little extra weight. But we have managed to keep a balanced department despite that. We sometimes feel our human side is a little bit overlooked, but that would have been the opposite, that would have been the same but opposite situation if we had gone to the College of Social Sciences. So it's both a strength and a weakness, right, to be integrative and holistic and to cross boundaries and to be a bridge. And so you are absolutely right, we do share a little bit of discomfort and obscurity because of that situation.
Thank you.
Dennis,
Yes.
did you want to say anything to that? Okay.
All right, Meg.
So this is a quick question for Dennis. When and what did you first notice about that co-ed sitting in your class?
It was a voice I could learn to love.
I have a very practical question. How on earth it was after you got married that you went on to graduate school and you were having children. How did you do all that?
Well, I left to go to graduate school in 1976. And so we were not married, for a couple of years through most of my master's thesis work. So I went back and forth. I actually occasionally would spend a quarter back in California. Also, Dennis's family happens to be from Minnesota, so I sort of had that Dingemans family connection milieu right around me. And let me say something before I forget in answer to Peggy's question. One thing that Dennis did tell me is that mine was the exam that could have been used as the answer key. So that draws the professor's attention to the student when you have an exam. You have exams of that quality. So we did okay, Ellie. We went back and forth a lot. Being geographers, we weren't afraid to travel. And in fact, we had many pleasant moments road tripping it between California and Minnesota. And we would see each other at academic meetings as well. And it just worked out A-okay.
I don't have a question, I have a comment. In my 50 years of playing for weddings, your son's was the most fun I've ever had.
Wow, that is a really nice comment, Barbara. Thank you. We were delighted that you are part of that team.
Can you suggest an author we might like to read who's accessible for the layperson about cultural geography? Who's the Carl Sagan or the Stephen Jay Gould of geography? Is there anyone, or should you be it?
Actually, I'm going to send you an article that I wrote fairly recently. The California Geographical Society was meeting at Cosumnes River College in Sacramento, and it's my look at events which have shaped the Sacramento landscape. And that will have some other citations in it. And then I'll think about maybe something more magisterial and less local. So thank you for that question.
Can you send it to others?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
This
Okay.
is a quick question for Dennis. As a former bus driver, I was delighted to see on your list of many things that you did, you drove bus for the Chicago transit system, and I wonder how long you did that and what you thought about that.
Well, it was one summer length of time, and I drove down 43rd Street during the era of rioting in Detroit, and so I had an exciting time. And my dad drove a school bus for 20 years, and my youngest brother drove a school bus for 32 years. Buses are in our blood.
Actually, he drove not a school bus. Carol Dennis. He drove for the
Minneapolis
St.
Rapid
Paul,
Transit.
Minneapolis St. Paul.
And he
yeah.
won the bus rodeo two times.
So I wanted to thank Dennis for a loan that he made a little while back, and it didn't show up in the slides, but to support Dennis's thrifting habit, he had a bright yellow pickup truck that was named Big Bird, and he loaned it to me one time when I had to move some heavy big things around, so I appreciated the use of Big Bird.
So this comes from sort of a different view. I taught 4th grade and 5th grade and 6th grade. And partway through my teaching career, I realized that geography was, I don't know, the hub of how I taught social studies. And for example, when I taught 4th grade California history, the first thing we did was learn, we made a sugar cookie, an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, sugar cookie that had Central Valley green, and the mountains were little chocolate chips, and the coast was lighter blue, and the desert was Red Hots. And then, of course, the kids got to eat it. But when I began trying to help kids understand how Native Americans lived and how the settlers settled and what they ate and how they, what kinds of dwellings they created, it was all about geography. And the kids, the parents went, oh, geography, that's supposed to be boring. So I thank you, the two of you, because it was the most important part of how kids got it. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. One of the challenges for geography K through 12 in California is that it is classified as a social science strictly. And so all of the stuff that draws kids in through contact with the natural environment, the climatology, the hydrology, the landforms, the distributions of plants and animals, doesn't really quite fit. And we would love to join, in the spirit of Eldridge Moore's, the effort to get the governing bodies of our state higher institutions to accept a physical geography 9th or 10th grade science class as a pre-college prerequisite, because it is not accepted now, neither geology nor physical geography.
When I was in high school, it was.
Okay, and he fought so hard to try to get that to happen with the regents, and it did not happen. And yet I think people experience the environment at the scale of geography and geology more than they do chemistry and physics. So I think a lot of kids would find those courses as entrees, you know, to the sciences, and so we're kind of missing an opportunity. But thank you for what you have done, Karen.
Well, going back a little bit, would you talk about your mother's career during World War II?
My mother's career?
Yeah.
Well, so my mom grew up partly in the Bay Area, and at the time of the Second World War, she was in high school. In fact, Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1941, was her 16th birthday. And the first thing that I really respect her for doing in the context of the war was going to bat for the Japanese students who were denied their high school diplomas, or were going to be denied their high school diplomas because they were sent off to the internment camps. And she and a number of students made an appeal to the school board in Alameda that was certainly unfair, and so they relented on that. And then she did become a Rosie the Riveter. So she was very small, and she could crawl into the nose cones of the planes, and she would do riveting and wiring and that kind of thing. And then she also then got her mom, because her dad died not too long after that. She got her mom involved too, and so she then had a successful career working for Alameda Naval Air Station.
Thank you.
Yeah. And she went on, of course, to live in Glacier Circle. So that's a whole other part of her life that is tied to the life of the church, and for which we are very grateful.
Are there any other questions?
Hi, thanks. Briefly, just a wonderful presentation. And I was just curious because I haven't been lucky enough to be on one of them yet, and I say yet. But your walking tours, you've given so many of them, you both, and I'm just curious if you have some things that you are kind of your favorite things to talk about on walking tours or in your classes too, or maybe what some of the singular kind of memorable moments have been there.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience in Oak Park, which some of you may know became a significantly African American community as African Americans were pushed out of the west end of the what's called the Old City, the original gridded area in Sacramento, so between the Capitol building and the Sacramento River. Redevelopment and freeway construction displaced them, and they were steered to Oak Park. And I'm very interested in really the geographies of segregation and of civil rights. And so my tour of Oak Park focuses not on its earliest history, but on what happened after the Second World War and how Oak Park became a place that was really challenged by poverty and racism and lack of opportunity, and nonetheless became a place where African Americans became involved politically and created black businesses and, made a creative and positive response to the situation they found themselves in. So that walking tour, which I also will lead, as well as people just picking up my booklet and doing it on their own, I find very satisfying to tell those stories. Thank you, Daniel. Dennis, did you want to talk about your field classes at all?
No, but I wanted to say that the two most useful publications I had as a geography faculty was I did a study of the results of the redlining. I was the first person to publish a significant work using the Mortgage Disclosure Act. The second article I did was one of the first studies of the evilness of the Proposition 13, and I evaluated the long-term impact of the
Of the capping of property tax increases.
Oh,
right?
That's right. The very great inequality involved in Proposition 13, insofar as it was a gift to those who already had. And it would maybe be an okay system for evaluating property taxes, but not in inflationary time. It's acquisition-based assessment is what we should use as a term. My study data came from the Davis area, and a graduate student and an undergraduate joined me in doing the work, and it was cited in several congressional studies as being the first evaluation of acquisition-based assessment.
But I have to add a footnote to what Dennis said. His most read article, as opposed to those that were cited in the congressional record, was a piece that he wrote on the burg of Rio Linda. Now, Rio Linda was a punching bag for Rush Limbaugh, and he used to make a lot of fun of Rio Linda, this challenged suburb on the north side of Sacramento. And he wrote an article about it, and it appeared in the Sacramento Bee. So that means 300,000 people got that article on their, well, I guess it was still the physical Bee on their doorstep. I don't know how many of the 300,000 read it, but I do give that article to my students even today, even though it was written a couple of decades ago. And those from Rio Linda really, really appreciate it. And so the job that geographers do to help people understand their own places better, some of the deeper history and geography and power struggles and lawsuits and all kinds of things that aren't necessarily apparent to the naked eye. That's really a lot of fun, and we hope that through our work we empower others to make their places better and more fair.
All right, and with that, I think we'll close the questions and give you an opportunity to come up and engage with them afterwards. Thank you so much, Robin and Dennis. Let's give them our appreciation.
And thank you, Susan, for helping us and for making this possible.